Hey guys, this is a video from my buddy TallyForGod.com. Hope you're doing well, Tally. Tally said, hey, let's do a video if you can do one on courage. So what we're going to talk about is war. There's a war between Israel and the Philistines. And picture this. This is the scene. I'm going to bring you right into the war. On one side is a very high mountain, and the Philistines are their army, all their troops are on that mountain. Then there's a valley, right, in between them. And on the other mountain are the army Israel. The armies of Israel are right there. Now, Jesse, he's a father, he's a dad, he's got four children, 4 kids. The oldest child, and then the second oldest child, Abinadab, and the third oldest child, Shammah, he sends them to this war. You know, they're fighting on the good team, Israel. David, however, is a shepherd boy. He's the youngest son. So he tells David, you know, basically watch the sheep. But as the war's getting ready to start, he sends David, his son, to the front, and he says, hey, look, bring this food, and he gives him cheese and parched corn and stuff. David goes to the army of Israel, and he's bringing this food, and as he's there, he overhears that Goliath, some believe he is from the Nephilim. You could read up about the Nephilim. It's a fascinating story. Very tall giants. And what happens is Goliath is absolutely huge. I'm reading from 1 Samuel 17. You got to read it. Like, just to give you an example, it says he had a coat of mail, Goliath did, and the weight of it was 5,000 shekels of brass. And he had these huge greaves of brass upon his legs and a target of brass between his shoulders. I mean, this is one giant dude, right? But David, being basically a young kid, he has had experience when he was guarding the sheep that a lion came and a bear came, and he actually protected the sheep from them. So what happens is he hears this Goliath speaking these disrespectful things towards the armies of God, and he also hears, they say, hey, you know what, whoever kills this Philistine Goliath, the king's gonna, really take care of him, give him, riches and all kinds of good things. So David hears this, right? And he says, what shall be done to the man that killeth this Philistine and take away the reproach from Israel? Notice what he's saying. And then David, what I love about David, he's very politically incorrect. He doesn't say, well, maybe we should talk to our enemies and maybe we should give them money, and, like how the government I live, United States of America and the UN, they're always appeasing the enemies. No. Look what David says, something very unpopular in our liberal times. He says, for who is this, like, in other words, he's like, who does this guy think he is, Goliath? David says, for who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? I love David. We need more men like David. And the people answered him after this manner, saying, so shall it be done to the man that killeth him. And he talks about how you could marry the king's daughter, you're gonna have riches, all kinds of good stuff. Well, David's brothers get kind of, I think they were embarrassed, and they tell him, why camest thou down hither? And with whom hast thou left the few sheep? In other words, aren't you supposed to be watching the sheep? And because here's like their young brother walking around the army, right? It's kind of embarrassing when your younger brother is doing so. And then they tell David, I know your pride and your naughtiness of your heart, for thou art come down that you may see the battle. But David's like, well, what have I done? Because his dad sent him down there to deliver the food. Now, why David is speaking against Goliath, Saul, this is awesome. Watch this. Saul is the commander of the army for Israel, the good guys. And Saul is blown away by what David's saying, because David has no fear, right? So it says, and when the words were heard which David spoke, they rehearsed them before Saul. They're telling Saul, look what David's saying. And Saul says, bring him here. So picture this. This commander of this great army of Israel, Saul, brings this young kid, David, to him. And Saul said to David, and David said to Saul, I'm sorry. So Saul and David are there. Saul calls for David, And David, picture this, he's talking to this commander of the Israel army. David's basically telling Saul, quote, let no man's heart fail because of him, talking about Goliath. He says, thy servant, talking about himself, David, will go and fight this Philistine. Now, Saul must have been blown away, and he is blown away. Look what it says here. Saul said to David, thou art not able to go against the Philistine to fight with him, for thou art but a youth. And then he talks about Goliath, and he a man of war from his youth. And David said unto Saul, thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock. And I went out after him, and smote him, and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he rose against me, I caught him by his beard, and smote him, and slew him. Thy servant, Saul, David's telling Saul, slew both the lion and the bear. And watch what David says, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing he hath defied the armies of the living God. What do I see in this story? I see David as a typology of Jesus Christ, the Good Shepherd, coming to Israel's aid to help them. Do you see that? Here's the shepherd, David, almost like a shadow of Christ coming to the earth, and he's coming to help Israel. Just like when Jesus returns and we say, Maranatha, he will come and restore Israel. Watch this. David doesn't end there. It's like, when you're talking about what you're going to do and you go, oh yeah, and another thing. David says that. David says, moreover, like another thing, the Lord delivered me out of the paw of the lion, out of the paw of the bear. He will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said unto David, and Saul's like, this kid's he's got the hand of God on him, right? And Saul said unto David, go, and the Lord be with thee. He knows God's with him. God's spirit is strong on him. And it is interesting that Saul has that discernment. And Saul armed David with his armor. Basically, it's a funny story here. David can't even put the armor on because it's all like, picture like a little boy and you're putting all this armor on him. And David says, I can't go with this. So David takes off the armor. He's unprotected, and he took his staff in his hand, and he chooses 5 smooth stones out of the brook. So picture this. His boy's going over to the brook. He's taking 5 smooth stones. Everyone's watching him like, what's he doing with those stones, right? And the Philistine came and drew near unto David, and the man that bare the shield of Goliath went before him. And when the Philistine looked about and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth and ruddy and of fair countenance. And the Philistine said unto David, am I a dog that thou comest to me with staves? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. So notice, Goliath starts mentioning his gods, cursing him. The Philistine said to David, come to me, and I will give thy flesh to the fowls of the air and the beasts of the field. David says to the Philistine, so they're having this war of words, right? Thou comest to me with the sword and with the spear and with the shield, but I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. This day the Lord will deliver thee into mine hand, and I will smite thee, and take thine head from thee, and I will give the carcasses of the host of the Philistines. In other words, he's like, we're even going to overtake your army. He's saying, and I will give the carcasses of the host of the Philistines this day unto the fowls of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth, hallelujah, may know that there is a God in Israel. And you know what happens next. Goliath is defeated. You can read the rest of the story. Goliath is defeated. David goes over there to Goliath. He removes his head. Now watch this. So David prevailed over the Philistine with the sling and with the stone, and smote the Philistine and slew him, but there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore, watch this, the ultimate put down to Goliath. He takes out Goliath's sword and uses it on Goliath. Is that not awesome? And that's what happens to the enemies of God. If you're an enemy of God and you're disrespecting God, you're disrespecting Israel, you know what? Be afraid. Be very afraid. Because you cannot fight against God. You cannot fight against people like David. I like to say, like, let's say Tally and I were like in a war, like back in the Bible days, and it was him and I against 20 Satanists. I would feel very confident that we would win. In fact, whether it be 50, 100, or 1,000, I would still stand by Tally's side, because I know, like David, he is a man of God. And God bless you, Tally. God bless you guys too listening to this, and have a great week.